So what I'm going to talk about today as well is why good communication is key. I'll talk about some of the stakeholders, the key stakeholders that you're going to be dealing with as a product manager, how to communicate with them, and then kind of talk about the structure of good communication and a way to think about how you can communicate with a whole range of different stakeholders. I guess I'll start off as well, a bit of introduction about me, who I am, and how I ended up as a product manager. So in terms of university and schooling, I studied multimedia, started that in 2002, so which is almost 20 years ago. And at that time, that was kind of at the time where like multimedia, tying video and audio was really becoming digitized, and people were starting to use Flash as a way of storytelling and doing animations. And a big part of that course was around how to construct narratives for different media types, and with kind of constant focus on the audience. I then ended up going to Australia for a year, meant to go there just for a year, but ended up getting a role at Yahoo, where I was working in ad technology, where I was doing lots of kind of development work, doing homepage takeovers for some big brand clients in Australia and New Zealand. Came back to the UK, did a master's in journalism, which was again a very specific type of storytelling and a very specific type of learning how to communicate with people. I then was working with the BBC as a designer, a digital designer, so I was kind of moving from a bit of development into design. The guy I worked with at Yahoo in Australia was then working in London. He came to approach me about a role at the team there, and I ended up going back to development there. So I was working on prototyping kind of new ad products for Yahoo in Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And then in that role, I kind of progressed into other roles. So I dabbled with a bit of being a Scrum Master for a while. That kind of morphed into started becoming a product owner role. I then got into people management, and then ended up heading up that department at Yahoo in EMEA. And that took me up to like nearly 10 years of working in advertising, and I kind of wanted to get out of that then and move into something else. And I found a role, I found a product actually that I was really keen on at a company called Reach PLC. Reach, the name might not be well known, but the brands that they have are, they're the largest commercial news publisher in the UK, so they own popular news brands like the Daily Mirror, Daily Star, Express. They have a massive regional footprint around the UK, and I think they reach around 45 million adults in the UK every month, which is basically the entire adult voting population. So then, the product that I'm working on in your area, we have a mobile app, iOS and Android. You can have a look at that if you like. And we're the UK's leading local news, information and community platform. And where in your area came from was, I guess, a big problem in the kind of news industry these days is that ever since the digitization of news and information happened, it's become very, very difficult to actually monetize local news. Because local news has smaller audiences, but then you have big kind of giants like Google and Facebook who have big brands trying to advertise and kind of gobble up ad impressions on all these publications. So In Your Area started off as an experiment basically to try and think about if local news started today without the kind of history of your local news publisher, your local news site, what would local news look like, and what would a local news platform look like? In Your Area started off as an experiment and has started to get lots of backing and traction, and started to grow. In terms of where we are in our product life cycle, we're probably kind of really starting to ramp up now in the growth phase, and getting quite a lot of backing from the kind of Reach beast. So what can you do in your area? Well, we aggregate news from Reach publications, but we also aggregate content from other news sites and from local blogs, and we curate the content, so we know where all the content is coming from. And we do other stuff as well, so we get local events, we take information, publicly available information about like crime statistics, property. We take in information around public notices. So if you want to know if your next door neighbour is planning to do an extension, we kind of have ways of gathering all that information and really turning it around quickly so it's like locally relevant. All you need to do on the platform is, if you're in the UK, just put in your postcode, you select a few locations that you're interested in, and we basically give you a kind of tailored feed to you. Trying to think, in terms of how back to the Top Gun code, so apart from Top Gun, I feel the need for speed, and that's basically kind of the ethos of the In Your Area team. That's how we work. Everything is about really quickly identifying a problem, thinking about a solution, and getting it to the market as quick as possible. There's some days where you might go in with an idea in the morning and 4 hours later there's some type of like really basic solution up on the site. So it does move very, very fast compared to teams that I previously worked for. At Yahoo, for example, we introduced kind of the Scrum or Agile and Scrum methodology, and that was a bit more focused on we had the meetings, sprint planning, review meetings, retrospective meetings. So we did quite an evolution of Scrum. But at the team I'm working in now, we kind of value the kind of one-to-one or one-to-two interactions of just like moving around between people's tables rather than making a fuss, getting everyone into a room, having meetings. We try to keep it as natural as possible so that we can keep the speed. This possibly will change, so I think a challenge if you're scaling a product or scaling a team is then if you start growing lots of users, how can you keep that type of culture without kind of compromising the product or kind of getting in people's ways and people stepping on each other's toes. So then to the main question, so why is good communication key? So I guess as a product manager, you start at the problem. You're trying to identify the problem that a certain type of person, a type of customer has, and you're basically trying to get some solution to the market. And so this is very simplistic. You basically go from the problem straight line to the market. But once you have your problem, or you think you have your problem, you're going to have to do some market research. If you're lucky enough to have a research team with you, you can kind of work with them to do the research. You have an idea, hypothesis that you kind of want to validate, which involves kind of doing kind of quick prototypes, wireframes with people. Once you have a prototype, then depending if you're in a startup or maybe even if in a corporate environment, you might want to get some backing for your product, so you might need investment. So you go to someone with a product and try and convince them to hand over the cash basically to give you money for a team or to get something off the ground. And then once you have that backing, you're trying to develop the product, where you go into the kind of development cycle of developing, releasing, reviewing and learning as you go along. But then as the kind of product scales and you're getting to market, you're going to have to interact with people who are kind of legal experts, and you might have to deal with people in marketing. And depending if how your product scales or how many people need to support it, you might have to deal with an operations team, or teams who are going to localize your product. So as you can see, you can quickly snowball the amount of people that you're having to deal with, and it never ever goes in a straight line. These are things as a product manager you might have to be aware of, but you're constantly in a loop between these different functions. You might think you're 90% there near the end, and then possibly might happen some regulation changes and someone from legal raises an issue, and then you might have to go back and change something, and it's basically, it can look like this gobbledygook. But the key thing is that at all these stages, you're dealing with people. So you're dealing with people in your team, and you're actually developing. You're dealing with designers, developers every day. You're trying to explain to them the problem that you're trying to solve. If you're dealing with marketing, you're trying to explain where you think your brand or your product is positioned in the market. If you're dealing with legal people, they obviously have their specific area of expertise. And you can be dealing with financial people who are obviously care about the money. So the key thing when you're dealing with people is communication is basically what we do day to day, whether it's face-to-face, emails, presentations like this. You are trying to get your message across, but at the same time as a product manager, you're trying to take the inputs from these people and try and get alignment towards a common goal. So at the different stages of your kind of product development life cycle, you're going to have kind of different goals or different things that you're going to have to do. So at the early stages, when you kind of have a product vision, you're going to have to set that out to people. You're going to have to explain to maybe a CEO, or you're going to have to explain to like a head of engineering or developers where your product is going and the need that it's satisfying. And that's a very specific type of communication. When you do get up and running, you're going to have to get buy-in from your team on a daily basis. If you're in kind of one of the big, large corporate companies, often these days they're not really kind of top-down hierarchical, they're very horizontal structures, so you're trying to convince people to kind of stop what they're doing or kind of pause that and help me solve this for a while. So there's this kind of constant trying to get buy-in from people on other teams. Like I said before, you might have to get buy-in from your company, you might have to explain to the board or like a chief product officer, try to get them to back your product. If you're in a startup environment, you might have to actually directly try to convince investors to part with the cash. And then ultimately at the end of the day, once you have your product, you're trying to convince a market to pay for your product over a competitor's. And the whole way through that, you're basically negotiating and influencing people. If you do get down then to the day-to-day work, a really important thing is to be able to prioritize your work to communicate that effectively with your team so that you're removing lots of ambiguity. Because inevitably there's questions, and that's something that kind of evolves over time. And basically, to get anything done, you need to be able to communicate with lots of different stakeholders. There's two important variables to keep in mind though when you're kind of communicating with people and thinking about what channel to communicate. What's going to be the best way to communicate with people, and that's time and the number of stakeholders that you need to get your message to or that you need to listen to. So often you're against the clock because you have so many things to do. So you need to be really concise in your communications. For example, sometimes it's often better to meet someone in person, talk to them rather than send a big A4 length email. And then the number of stakeholders. Again, this is something you can't really control depending on your company size and the kind of internal politics of your company. It could be, you might be really empowered with a small group to make a big difference, or you might have to negotiate lots of different stakeholders and kind of find your way to navigate how to get buy-in in the quickest manner possible. But I think it's all about trying to be concise, saying what you want to say in the shortest time. And then, going on to the next slides, I'm going to talk about stakeholders, but who would you say is your most important stakeholder? Yeah, buddy. So yeah, the customer is basically the center of everything, and you need to have ways of listening and communicating with them. And that depends a lot on kind of what you're trying to do and what stage of your product development life cycle you're in. I find if you're kind of in the earlier stages, you're doing more qualitative stuff. So you could be doing research sessions, just talking to customers one-to-one. One thing that's really useful is just going to meetups, like if it's around a specific topic, a pain point that your product is going to address. And actually just talking to people and finding ways to find out really what their pain points are. A key thing when you're at that stage and you're talking to them is around how to ask questions properly. So don't leave them with answers where you're kind of giving them like kind of false dichotomy, like yes/no answers, but really ask them open questions. So tell me about this problem. Even ask them like questions like how much would you pay for this solution? Like really like questions where you're asking how, why, what, rather than do you type answers where you're kind of limiting their choices. And then once your product is actually up and running and you hopefully have some analytics on it, it's really good to get quantitative feedback from your clients. So for example, in your area, something we introduced recently was we have one way we monetize the site is local businesses can go in, and we have our own self-serve advertising platform. They can go in and just pay for ads for like small radiuses, local radiuses. And we noticed that people were abandoning the cart at a specific stage, so we introduced ways of launching polls when it looks like someone is going to abandon their cart, so we can actually really quickly find out what's the reason people are abandoning at that stage. So yeah, I constantly think about ways of getting kind of quantitative feedback as the product develops. Then this is kind of core stakeholders. I call it core because if you're in a startup or a corporate environment, this is generally a kind of small kind of core of people that you're going to have to deal with. People might argue you could include some other functions in here as well, but I was just wanted to pick 3 to really focus on. So obviously designers and developers are the guys who are going to be helping you actually realize your product vision. Designers, I guess, kind of stereotyping, they can be quite quirky, but they're great kind of creative minds. And I often find that the person or people that I'm talking to about the problems first is actually the designers. So you might kind of just explain to them what the problem is. They'll come up with a solution. You might give them a kind of quick wireframe of what you think the solution is, and they'll kind of realize that, or they should be giving you good feedback on what's good or what's bad about that. Then with developers, developers have I find anyway, a different way of thinking about things. Obviously they're very logical people, and they're kind of thinking what's the kind of quickest and most efficient way to get to a solution. And often, sometimes I might come up with a solution for a problem which will involve like 5 steps. Talk to a developer, and they'll say, oh, but you could just do this, 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 and they'll reduce it down to like a 3-step solution, which is useful for our team when we're trying to get stuff out the door pretty quickly. And then everyone has to kind of answer to someone really at some stage, unless you're the founder. So you might have to talk to the CEO, and you need to be mindful of people at a kind of higher level, like a chief products officer or a CEO, that they don't really need to get into the nitty-gritty of day-to-day prioritization, like the exact features you're working on for the week. They are more kind of interested on how your metrics or your kind of key indicators are actually affecting the company's goals and how your product is aligning with the company's goals. So you need to be really mindful of that when you're dealing with those stakeholders. And then as companies grow, you start liaising with more kind of a wider circle of people. You might be lucky enough to have support for some of these functions. So researchers or analysts, we're doing some research at the minute around kind of community engagement, where we're getting people in and asking them about different things about how they would engage with people, and what are the benefits of using some of our competitors versus us, that type of thing. Which is really interesting. If no one's ever done those research sessions, they're actually really interesting to sit in on. Then marketing, once you're getting close to release, you have marketing functions who are kind of asking you questions about, like they might be asking you things about your goals, what type of audience you're trying to reach. They might even advise you on your pricing strategy compared to competitors, and basically trying to define where you sit in the marketplace. Finance, these can be very difficult people. I should know I'm married an accountant, and they're basically a very specific type of audience. They're the ones who are asking about the money all the time, so you kind of really have to tailor a message every time to the accountants. Operations and sales, then they're potentially quite linked. So with the salespeople, they're obviously interested in the story about your product, what the story is that they should tell their customers. They need to know about the pricing, and then tied to them is operations, who are basically the people who are keeping the lights on, keeping the ship running when I guess all the time. They kind of keep stuff going 24/7, and they have specific questions around where does support come from? Who do they ask questions to? If stuff goes wrong, where do I go? Is there a frequently asked questions section, etc. So then that's a kind of overview of some of the stakeholders, but a kind of framework to think about how you should communicate, or when you're thinking about communicating with these different stakeholders. I came up with this acronym, so DNA, so data, and that's all about the data to back up your narrative, which is the next step, is like, how do you convince people, know what they need to hear, and kind of form a story around your data to convince them. And then audience. Audience is probably the most important one, because it's the same as the whole thing about product management is kind of knowing your customer. But at the same time, when you're dealing with people internally, you kind of have to know your audience. You have to kind of know their goals, their desires, what their priorities are, and where you fit into that. And then I put in and relationships here, because I think it's not just about the actual audience, it's how they perceive you and what your relationship is with them, and the kind of level of comfort you have bringing up difficult subjects. And I think that all comes from the relationships you have. So, so to go into the data piece. So the data, the way I think about data anyway, is data is the thing that often helps you win any arguments or any conversations you have with people. Because if your data is watertight and you are confident in your data, it's probably the most difficult thing for people to deal with, or to argue with if it's accurate. So as a product manager, the kind of first thing you need to do is you need to know what your key metrics are. So you need to know what's your key metric that aligns to the company's goals, and how your key metric is going to basically push the dial for the company overall. So in your area, for example, that is one of them is the amount of people who share their postcodes with us. Because if people share their postcodes, it means we can tailor content to them, and it means they're invested, and then it allows us to open up a whole other area of ways we can gather data from them. It's kind of our entry point and their entry point into our platform. Then there's vanity ones as well. So, for example, there could be things around a presentation recently where we were talking about a marketing campaign we did, and we did a massive amount of slides. But then when we actually had to go to present this to the kind of leadership group, you realise that there's so many of these which are interesting at the kind of marketing level, but when you're presenting it to like the CEO or like the leadership group, there's like they're only looking for a very small slice of that. They just need the headline information, and you need to be able to kind of separate what important information is from kind of more vanity, nice, kind of fluffy metrics. Data independence. So this is, to me, this is maybe not essential, because some people might argue as a product manager you don't necessarily need this, but I find it useful if I'm able to go in and grab data myself, if I'm able to know where the information is coming from, if I can go in and query the information myself. So that could be from Google Analytics, could be from spreadsheets, could be directly from databases. And if you're able to get that and understand where that comes from, see problems with the data, it really helps your understanding of the data. And when you're in meetings or if people are actually questioning the data, you're able to kind of go back and explain anomalies or explain why things are the way they are without relying on maybe a data scientist or maybe an engineer that might have to do something for you. So to me, that's an important thing, to be able to be independent so that you can get a deeper understanding of the data. Then the next part is kind of about forecasting. So when you're dealing with leadership and the financial teams, they're going to be asking about kind of where your product is going for the next 3 to 6, 12 months. And the kind of pitfall you kind of fall into a few times in the past is that you kind of predict where you think it's going. That rarely happens. So it's always good to have a kind of, instead of giving this is the path we're going, to give a range. So to always give like a kind of bearish and bullish estimate. So bearish is kind of if things go badly, this is what we're looking at. If things go very well, bullish, this is where we're going. And then when you kind of look at how that ties to your team's resources, you do the same thing in terms of you should be able to achieve this versus this is what we think is feasible. And then if you're in a company where they have OKRs, which is a kind of way of measuring kind of performance, which means objectives and key results, they often say to aim for the stretch. So you're always aiming for the stretch, but you're usually very lucky to hit a stretch goal. And then one which is not easy for everyone, but I think it's worth kind of looking into a few lessons and presentations on is around data visualization. So it's true, a picture paints 1,000 words. If you're looking at large data sets, but you're only trying to extract or get very specific information or get a very specific point across, it really helps if you're familiar with tools which can help you turn complex data into something more visual. This is really useful for those kind of board meetings when you're dealing with kind of leadership. The tool I'm using at the minute is Google Data Studio. I only started using that about 12 months ago. I find it very useful, but there's a whole plethora of different data visualization products out there. Cool. So once you have your data, which I think is kind of the cornerstone of kind of convincing people, you kind of need to form a narrative around that. So the narrative is connecting your data to where your product vision is. So I'm just going to talk through a few different narrative structures, and then we'll try and apply them to our previous stakeholders. So has anyone heard of the inverted pyramid? Yeah, cool. Yeah, so the inverted pyramid is kind of common way of structuring a story amongst journalism and when people are writing news. So you start at the top, and that's basically the core information, the who, what, where, why, when, the kind of key information you really need to know. And then as you go down through the story, the information kind of becomes less important until then at the end it's basically meh. It's stuff that's not really core to the story. And then if you plot that on a graph of importance and time, it looks like this. You're kind of slanting downwards. So this is useful for when you're trying to get really important key information across and trying to land that at the beginning because people only have a short attention span, so you're trying to get kind of key information right at the beginning. Then the hero's journey. Has anyone heard of this? Yeah. So hero's journey is basically a very standard form of storytelling or structuring a story. You see it in basically every Hollywood movie, or in so many like nursery stories and kind of basic stories, where basically the character starts off in the ordinary world, where they're in their kind of normal, their safe space, then they come across something which takes them into a kind of new world, a new reality. When they're in this new reality, then they're kind of coming across new characters, and they're having to there's kind of tension building in the story all the time, up until the climax, which is the kind of at the top, and then basically once the kind of the climactic scene happens, there's kind of a few minutes of it kind of takeaway and the kind of you land your key message. So this is if this was like Top Gun, for example, you could say that like this part here is when they're in their ordinary world on their ship. They get brought up to Top Gun, and then Goose dies later on, and they meet with certain characters. Iceman is a bit of a dick, and then they go up to a kind of the climax is where they actually put what they've learned into the real world, and they go off to fight a battle, and then at the end everybody's buddies. And then the elevator pitch. This is a very important one for a product manager. This is a structure which I came across at Yahoo, which still use now because I think it basically does everything an elevator pitch should do, which is basically condensing your kind of what your product is into a very short space of time. So who your target market is, what the problem is that you're trying to solve, who your competitors are, and how you differentiate yourself from your competitors. Excuse me. So I think this is good practice anyway as a product manager, even if you don't have to like pitch to someone, just actually write this use this kind of structured sentence to actually write down what your product is. So for in your area, for example, it's for local people who want to keep up to date what's going on in their community in your area. It's a mobile app that aggregates local news, opinion, and statistics. Unlike Nextdoor, the product provides curated local news from trusted sources. So I don't know if any of you have heard of Nextdoor, but they do some similar stuff to us, but they're very much kind of user-generated content, community-focused, whereas we started more from the news side, but there is overlap. So then, if you were to look back at the stakeholders we have that we covered earlier, if you were, say, you're dealing with sales and you're launching your product and you're trying to get them motivated and trying to get them kind of G'd up to go out and sell it, what type of narrative structure might you use?
Heroes.
Yeah, I would say the heroes one as well. I mean, it's not always the case because it does depend on the individuals, but yeah, I would say the hero's journey because it's good to kind of tell the story, and I think salespeople want impact. They want to kind of have a story that they can then go out and tell. If you were to look at maybe operations, so say you're launching the product, operations people want to know how are they going to be supported if stuff goes wrong, or how do they implement something, what structure might work for them. Yeah, I would say the inverted pyramid as well. We're trying to land the kind of who, what, where, why, when pretty quickly. And then finally, maybe the leadership team, so say you're trying to get investment. It's an easy one, we'll go with the elevator pitch. Okay, so then moving on to the audience. So with the audience, I do think this is probably the most important because you need to understand who you're talking to. I mean, when I was coming here today, it was quite difficult for me because I've actually never been to one of these events, so I didn't really have an idea of what the audience was going to be like. But a kind of key thing of knowing your audience is kind of being empathetic to your audience. You kind of have to not want to be quite dictatorial in what you're saying and kind of my way, my way, my way. You have to really make an effort to understand people. A key part of that is listening. And people think that they listen, but it's really tough to be a good listener. I found that earlier in my career, we were working with a team from Cairo. There was some really talented guys in the Cairo team. But I got a bit of a reputation as a bit of a kind of hardball, hard ass who said no to everything. And I got that reputation, but they were right. I was being like that. And my manager at the time said that once you kind of get a reputation like that, it's very tough to shake that or change people's other opinions of you. So I kind of learned the hard way. I did manage, I hope, to change people's opinion, but you really have to work on listening to people and really trying to understand their motivations and understanding their priorities and their goals. And once you know that and you have your data story and you kind of know what people are looking for and where their goals are, then you can tailor your narrative to suit what they need to hear to kind of get them to align with you. And a key thing I've touched on it earlier is only use data that's meaningful to them. So if you're dealing with finance, there's no need to talk about click-through rates or kind of some of the marketing metrics. Same if you're dealing with salespeople, they want to know about pricing and stuff, but they obviously don't want to hear about the cost of your product or some of those type of things. So yeah, really tailor your narrative to your audience. And then a really important part of, well, I kind of learned this more from people management, but an important part of product management is managing expectations. So you have all these people in the business who are looking forward to products getting released, or requesting different features from you, but you only have a certain amount of control over that. You can control the features, you have some control over the quality, you might not necessarily have control over time. People will ask you for, I want 10 features, the best quality in the next week. Well, obviously you can't deliver all that, so you need to be able to manage expectations. And I think the best way to do that is around being transparent, open and honest with them around what your priorities are. So if you have your kind of key metrics in place and you know where your product is going, you need to basically be reminding the company and everybody, all your stakeholders, what your priorities are. And that really makes managing expectations easy, because if you can say, yes, these are good ideas, but you have to be laser focused on X, Y, Z for the next 3 months. It really makes kind of managing expectations a lot easier. And yeah, the final point there, like I said, if you know your priorities, you cannot over communicate them. So keep reminding people of what your priorities are, if your priorities change, and if your data story is good, then you should have no idea telling people if your priorities change, why they've changed. So yeah, sorry, in your area at the minute, because we're moving quite fast, it's high growth, like our priorities are changing a lot. For example, in the last 3 months, we had kind of plans or OKOs for Q4, and at the minute now, I'm actually kind of completely revising them. So yeah, it changes a lot, but as long as you have your data story and you know why you're doing things, it makes it easy. And then sometimes a part of managing expectations is that a big part of it is actually saying no. So as a product manager, you're often the bearer of bad news to people that are requesting things of you. And it's not nice, because sometimes people have brilliant ideas. They come to you with really, really good ideas. But you have to be able to kind of weigh up those ideas versus, like I said, your priorities and why you're trying to get to where you're going. So the kind of technique I use for saying no, which hopefully no one in my business finds out about, is basically if people come to you and they say we should do X, Y, Z on the landing page, you could say to them, say what you like about it. Say I like this element of it, and we might consider that in the future. But always start with the positive thing before kind of landing the no in the kind of second part. So say, I like this about your idea, that's really good, but at the minute, like I said, we're focusing on this for now, and because of that, we're going to park that idea, so we're not going to do it. Sometimes it's easier, people come up with like ridiculous ideas, it can be really, really easy, you can just say no. And then, so the next part, apart from audience, is the relationships that you have with people. And this is like a really kind of key thing that I learned more from managing people, I think, and from working with teams which are really close and you get on well with people, is that it's good to actually take time out of work, like mad, to actually like bond with your team, actually like go for drinks, go for lunches, go bowling, to actually like take the time to actually talk with them outside the work environment. And not just because that's good for kind of team building and bonding and stuff, but also when people are outside of the work environment, they're less stressed, they're less focused on work, and they actually give really good ideas. So some of the best ideas I think that I've heard, I remember specifically at my time at Yahoo, we used to have like a pretty good kind of social scene. You get some amazing ideas from people like on a Friday night after work, and then you nearly have to write that down and we'll talk about it on Monday. So I think that's the key thing, and probably something, don't underestimate that as a product manager. Obviously don't force it, don't go overboard, but it is good every once in a while to blow off a bit of steam with your team. And then if you do have those kind of relationships with your team, and it's all about building trust. Like you should hopefully get to this stage of Iceman and Maverick, where at the start they were enemies, but then they kind of find out where the commonalities are. They grow together, and then when they're kind of put in a real challenging situation, at the end of the day, they have each other's backs, and there's a trust between functions. So just in the same way a product manager trusts a developer and designer might trust you to make the right decisions. This is basically what you want to be aiming for as a product manager.